Welcome to Out of the Blank.
Welcome to another episode of Out of the Blank podcast. I'm here with a special guest. We're going to talk about my favorite subject. At least as of recent, it's my favorite. Rob, can you please introduce yourself to everyone out there listening?
Yes, Rob, or sometimes known as Bob Clark, host of the Lone Gunman podcast and co-host of Quick Hits, a JFK assassination news and notes podcast as well. Recently been doing about 200 episodes of the Lone Gunman for the past 8 years, and been doing Quick Hits for about 3 with my buddy Doug Campbell, who hosts the Dallas Action podcast.
Is the Lone Gunman title name, is that ironic because you don't actually believe that it's a lone gunman?
Yeah, it was meant to be an ironic title because I was doing the show by myself at the very beginning of everything. The original idea was me and my friend Doug wanted to do a show together, but at the time we wanted to start doing it, technologically we weren't there yet, to make it happen and sound decent. So we just kind of each started our own respective shows. And then when we were able to do it together, we did, but we still kept our other shows.
Where do you particularly focus, like out of all the topics or probably all aspects of the case that you've really kind of either touched upon or dug deeper in, where do you focus when it comes to the Kennedy assassination?
I tell you what really interests me is Thomas Beckham. Are you familiar with him at all? No? All right. We can get into him a little bit too on the show. But he's one of the most fascinating characters in the whole thing. Buell Frazier as well, kind of what was going on in the school book depository. Just really, it just makes me really, really think about what exactly was going on that day,
Well, it's trying to understand the personalities involved in the case. And I think a lot of people don't know how interesting it is. And I think when you get interested in it, you start realizing there's just a lot of stuff. I don't believe that it was a lone gunman. I believe it was way more. There was a conspiracy to kill JFK, but there was a lot of issues when I'm not a JFK fanboy. I'm not like how everyone thinks he was the best president. I just don't know him. I see some of the stuff in his change of his personality throughout his, I would say his, his job and everything. That's a nice shirt. Is he smoking a joint? What is that?
I think he's vaping. I don't know.
But it for me, what I saw was you had 3 people that day that were killed. Or you had 3 people in general in the whole case that were killed, at least when it comes to just Oswald, Tippit, and then you have Mr. Kennedy. And they all had kids. So you got to look at it from an aspect of, okay, now we have to see who's right, who's wrong, what's real, what's not. And then what I found was interesting was I found the resume for Oswald and also his interview where the guy talked about interviewing this boy and would sit down and he would ask him how do you want the job? How'd you get these connections? And to me, that's the interesting part about it. I just start seeing I'm getting a better aspect of this character that they pinned to be this crazy nut job.
Yeah. That's something I never understood either. No matter how bad things were for somebody, and a good way to approach the case is to kind of put yourself in their shoes back at that time. And, a lot of people do forget that Oswald was a father of 2. He had just had a baby, a month before the assassination. And are things really that bad that you're going to potentially throw your whole life away to shoot at the president of the United States? I mean, that's something you really got to think about. As a parent, I can't even fathom doing that, no matter how ideologically opposed to someone or something that I am. I mean, you're essentially saying, okay, you might get away with it. Chances are you're not, doing something like that in public with hundreds of people around. The chances of you getting away with it are slim to none. So you're essentially, you're going to throw your life away for what? I thought things really that bad.
I thought of the lone nut response to that, which would be like maybe Marina was on his back too much and he just needed to get away.
Well, then just leave her. I mean, there's so many other things that would make sense. Of course, nothing about this case makes sense when you really look at it. But were things really that bad between him and Marina, and his thought about that kind of life with her and the kids, where he just didn't care anymore enough to throw his own life away? Essentially, I just don't buy it.
Well, the always example I hear, which was the argument, which was that the reason why people think there's conspiracy is that they couldn't believe that their president could be killed like that. And I'm like, I think it's a lot more than that. There's a lot of things there that aren't making sense, like certain protocols that weren't followed. There's just weird areas that either they don't get addressed or the people who believe it was one guy don't really talk about, but they'll refute a bunch of points that you'll make and they'll like pick and clean it. And I'm like, I mean, I don't think this is an admiration for, maybe in some cases an admiration for JFK, but if you really look at it, there's just a lot of like really strange and really like, you can say coincidence to a point. But when you see like the form 1035-960, or you look at that and it says from the Warren Commission given to every media outlet saying like any new evidence that comes out against the Warren Commission, make sure that you label it as a conspiracy. Then at the bottom it says destroy this document when no longer needed. You're like, all right, hang on a second. Every conspiracy person out there just was like, holy shit, because that's what we've been saying for the longest time with media sources today, that everybody's pitching a narrative, and then there's your evidence for it.
Yeah, I mean, you could look at, like I said, even today, I think a lot of people forget today, at least today, that the CIA even exists, unless they're watching a Mission Impossible movie. I mean, it flies so far under the radar nowadays with autonomy and no oversight that you probably wouldn't even know it exists. If I didn't live an hour away from them, I probably would forget about them a lot. But back in the 60s and 70s, when the church committee was doing their thing and the Senate and the House were really trying to put some oversight on them, it just seems like after the HSCA and moving into the 80s, it was just like, okay, moving forward, the CIA has unlimited budget, no oversight, and they can do what they want, and you'll never hear a peep out of them. You know what I mean?
Do you think that the House Select Committee, like, I guess conflicting feelings about them. I think they did a lot of amazing work in the beginning, but then like we're still like they're past due on when we're supposed to have all those documents released. I think they did great work trying to get a lot of this, like the ARB did great work too, but then it seemed like either they came across something where they realized it could be a threat to national security, and then nobody ever talked. And that's always what I hear about, like the doctors from Parkland or all these people that have interviewed all these people. They say, once the documents come out, you'll know what we know. And I'm like, did you guys come across something with this idea of like, I'm going to make sure that we get all the information out there? Then you saw something that was kind of serious and you were like, we can't let the public know, because like we're still in this position where you have people bickering back and forth over really small details. And it's like, they go, what are the released documents going to have? I'm like, I have no clue. I've heard so much stuff. I don't know what's real in this case. Did they do an autopsy before the original autopsy? Is Jack Ruby really this puppy loving guy that they say he is? I don't think so. I hear some crazy stories, man.
Yeah. With the documents, it's hard to say. I mean, we'll just have to wait and see until, what is it, 2037? I think it's when the rest of the Warren Commission documents are going to come out. And with the releases, you got a little bit of stuff in the past couple of years, but no smoking guns. I don't think there's going to be any smoking guns. They've had enough time to destroy whatever they wanted to destroy. What they didn't destroy at the time, to make sure that nobody would ever see it. But as far as any smoking guns, I just don't think we're going to have them. I think it's going to be left to either some deathbed confession, which we've had a few, but or something else meaningful from people that were there and involved, or somebody stumbles across something, or people just finally put the pieces of the puzzle together and figure it out beyond a doubt.
Did you go into it thinking that there was conspiracy? Like, have you had, like, I've had moments where I'm reading the Warren Commission and then I'll be like, maybe it was a lone nut. And then like I start seeing other things where I have to ground myself and be like, hold on, there's conspiracy. Just don't lose sight of that. And then I'm looking like I'm trying to look at everything impartial and be in the middle on everything. I just trying to figure out what the historical record should be or what I think I want it to be. Not I wouldn't say what I want it to be, but what I want to be correct. I just want it to be right. And when I start coming across documents and realizing how secret everything is and documents we don't have, it's kind of like, where's the truth then?
Yeah, I feel the exact same way. And, my thoughts on the case have wavered throughout the years. I mean, I've been interested in it for probably 30 years. Um, and that goes back to, high school and about the same time that the Oliver Stone movie was coming out. And, Crossfire was big. And then just over the years, looking into different aspects of it. And the thought does come across, and you have to look at it. Okay, well, what if Oswald really did this? And you try to look at the evidence objectively, and you try to look at the testimonies objectively, and nothing really makes sense. But I've talked to lone nutters on my show. I like to be able to have a dialogue. I'm not going to sit there and have a pissing contest or a pissing match with somebody who is just irrationally, supporting a lone nutter. If you come on my show and that's your frame of mind, then you better be able to back it up with something, other than just because I think so.
What about when we talk about Frazier? Frazier talked about seeing Oswald walk into the book depository building with a long, like a long package, something that was he was kind of holding at his side, and people would suggest that was the gun that he was planning. But then I've heard statements from the guy who worked at the book depository building who saw Oswald come into the building and said he didn't have a package at all. So you're having like these conflicting statements. Is like I don't know who I know Frazier's apparently his best friend. I know he drove him there that day to the store. But where you mentioned Frazier in the beginning, what about Frazier did you notice or anything about him or the person you mentioned before that you find interesting?
Well, I find it interesting that he was arrested that day, given a polygraph examination, um, and we don't have. It's one of the missing documents. There is no Frazier polygraph test with the results or the questions asked. They just say he passed it, and that's just supposed to be good enough. But for the package, I've kind of looked into everything, and Frazier's always stated that it's been about 2 feet long, somewhere in the neighborhood of 24 to 28 inches. Which even when you break a rifle down, the Carcano, it's at least 34 inches of stock. That you can't break it down any further than that. So either Frazier was lying about the length of the package from the get-go, and he knew Oswald had a rifle, and he knew Oswald took that rifle into the school book depository, or Oswald had a 2-foot package with curtain rods in it. There's no other answer, and there's been some things over the years that kind of make you think that, well, maybe Frazier was lying. It doesn't mean that Oswald was on the 6th floor shooting a rifle. It just means that maybe Oswald got that rifle into the depository somehow, some way. I mean, the rifle didn't walk in there on its own. You know what I mean? So if Frazier knew that Oswald took a rifle into that building, and then you're the guy that gave him a ride to work, and then the president ends up getting killed, that might be impetus enough for you to lie about it, as as not an accessory after the fact, kind of like the Sylvia Mar book. But it's just hard to say, man. I mean, I was waiting so long for that dude to write a book, and he finally did, and it was straight trash.
What did he write about?
Well, the name of the book was Steering Truth, which he's done throughout the years. He's very notorious. If you go back and look at the HSCA investigators' notes of them trying to track him down and just talk to him, he was giving them the runaround for weeks and months on end. He did not want to talk to them. And then you look at the O'Toole book, George O'Toole book, the assassination tapes. If you believe in the PCS machine or the PCR machine, whatever it's called, um, the audio lie detector. He found that Frazier's statements, um, that he wasn't being truthful, and he had trouble tracking Frazier down and talking to him. It's just odd behavior. Frazier's really never been interviewed and asked the hard questions. He always pops up to do a fluff news piece, for the Channel 5 news, or, I drove Oswald to work that day and blah, blah, blah. Where he recounts his little tale, but as far as being pressed and held to the fire and being asked legit questions, it hasn't really happened.
Did you look at Dallas politics back then and just to see what Dallas time period was like? I mean, because I tried to look at it and I've heard stories about like a lot of people in the Dallas police force were like known KKK members. And then a lot of people, maybe their statements might have been kind of skewed a certain way to fit the narrative because of an aspect of people were just didn't want to be associated with a cop killer. Or, I mean, that's what he was getting pinned on. And as much as everyone knows him for killing Kennedy or allegedly killing Kennedy, the real evidence was the fact that Tippit was dead. And I've heard so many back and forth stories on Tippit about him being loved by the police officers or he was not really liked by the police officers. And it's just like, what the hell's true? I mean, I can understand corruption. Okay. And I look at it like this. If you just got the person who allegedly killed the president, who's getting blamed for killing the president, you have him in your custody. You're about to get the FBI, the CIA, the Secret Service, the media, all wanting interviews and all having eyes on you. So what does that mean? All your extracurricular activities are about to start getting looked into, and something might be exposed where you're doing wrong. So then they didn't really need to protect them as much as they probably should have. And there you go. You have Jack Ruby shooting them.
Yeah. And you have Jack Ruby being, tight with a lot of these cops and giving them special treatment in the club. And,
well, they were never at the club, apparently.
Yeah, right. Right. You believe that one? I'll tell you another one. So as far as the politics go back then, I think Fritz was pretty notorious for being like, he had his homicide clearance rate was astronomical. And along with Henry Wade as a district attorney, if something got pinned on you in Dallas back then, chances are you're going to take a ride. You're not getting off. And damn the evidence, Fritz's thing was trying to make people sign confessions so that it was just like, all right, once you go to court, well, you sign the confession, you're guilty. We're done. See you later. And the whole Tippit thing went away relatively quickly when they figured out that, well, shit, we can pin, we can get this guy for the Tippit shooting, but more importantly, he's the guy that killed the president, and the whole Tippit thing got kind of pushed to the background and not really investigated the way it should have been.
Well, it's not. I think it was not even a day after Oswald was arrested. There were memos from Katzenbach and Hoover that were saying that we have the killer of the president. Like there was no investigation into it. It was Oswald did it, and that's final. And there were messages, I mean, from people that weren't even in Dallas at the time to be able to look into it or even do their own investigation. There was memos being sent from the White House to all these other sources to J. Edgar Hoover and saying, hey, we got Oswald in custody. He's the killer of the president. So everything's, okay. And we're going to figure everything out. And it's just like, man, they didn't give him a fair trial. Obviously, he didn't even get to live to see a trial, but it's just, I've never seen an investigation be done that way before, where it's just pinning one person the whole time. Like usually you would think that the Warren Commission would be something where you're investigating the president's death, but this one was Oswald did it. And we're going to show you how.
Yeah, I think it was definitely, to quote the Mark Lane title, the rush to judgment, for sure. Because I think, you got to remember, this is the early 60s. The president has just been killed. It's the middle of the Cold War. Everybody's scared to death of nuclear war back then, or the thought of nuclear war. You might possibly have nukes 60 miles off your shore. I think the decision was made relatively quickly to pin this on one man and one man alone with no ties to Russia or Cuba or any other of our enemies at the time, because, you know, it just would have gotten really ugly really quick and could, you know, potentially have gotten millions of people killed. And that, I think that's what Johnson was worried about. And, you know, that's how he kind of cajoled um, Earl Warren into heading this commission. You know, hey, look, you know, we got to prove that Oswald was a lone assassin in the eyes of the public, and that's it. We need to move on. We can save millions of lives doing it, and that's how we're going to do it.
Do you think? Basically. Do you think Johnson was part of the plot to kill Kennedy, or do you think he did his best to cover it up?
No, I don't think Johnson had any part in it at all. No, not at all. If anything, you know, he might have not liked the Kennedys, but he wasn't the best person. Which is, you know, some of these Secret Service accounts of him pissing on the shoes and kicking dogs.
Wait, what?
And banging secretaries. Oh yeah, he would go out in the Rose Garden of the White House and take a piss and have all of the Secret Service guys form a circle around him so nobody could see, but he would piss on their shoes just to be a dick. That's the kind of guy he was.
I wish I would have learned this shit in school. It would have I probably would have got A's in all my classes.
Oh yeah, he would be taking a shit and make people come in and talk to him in the bathroom.
That's like when Bill Cosby, before he would go to bed, they would have one of the bodyguards tuck him in at night.
Yeah. You know, the stories are insane when it comes to all these people, but you know, everybody, people that always say, oh, you know, it was Lyndon Johnson was behind this and that and the other. But once he actually became president, he realized, okay, this is not all it's cracked up to be. I mean, he didn't even run again. There's phone call transcripts of him talking to his aides, you know, about, you know, pretty much saying, I'm in way over my head. You know, I don't understand what the hell is going on. I don't want to do this anymore, kind of thing. And that's why I didn't run again. So if that was his true ambition, oh, I want to be president, well, then he would have ran again, you know?
Well, I get what they say when they think a lot of people think Johnson did it, mostly because it just seems like he covered up a lot of stuff. I would agree more with the fact that he probably found out about what happened to Kennedy and he realized if he didn't play ball, he was probably going to be next. But I don't think he orchestrated the plot, because you wouldn't sit a car behind Kennedy with your wife, whether you're in a bubble top or not. I mean, they knew it wasn't bulletproof. The general public didn't know it was bulletproof. So if a missing shot, we see the James Tague bullet. I mean, that could have happened to him if he was the one. You wouldn't make a plot like that and sit right behind the president. You would sit at least all the way at the end, or not even be there on that ride when it happens. But there's just a lot of stuff where he's not out of the clear. I definitely think, like, I knew that they were taping conversations and stuff, but one of the most important things is when he says, how many bullets were fired? And Hoover's like, 3 were fired. He goes, was any of them fired at me? Right there is why I say he's a part of the cover up, because that's a guy who's worried more about self-preservation rather than anything else. He doesn't care about Kennedy's death. He was more worried about himself. So, I mean, to me, that's evidence.
Yeah. You know, and he was buddies with Hoover. I mean, I think they were neighbors. So, you know, it's, we don't have the entire picture. I mean, yeah, we have some taped conversations, but I'm sure the in-person conversations would have been really interesting to hear between Hoover and Johnson. I think we would get a much better picture. And then, of course, you know, you have Johnson saying that crazy stuff, you know, towards the end of the 60s when he let his hair grow long and
did he look good? Did he look good?
Yeah, he looked pretty sweet. Yeah. They got into some of that peyote and weed down there in Texas, you know, towards the end of his life. I don't know what he was doing, but you know, it's just hard to tell. You know, you have all these people, you know, that want to associate themselves with the case. You know, like Madeline Brown, of course, came out and said, you know, all this stuff about Lyndon Johnson and this Mac Wallace stuff, and it just gets crazy, man. There's so many spider webs in this case. It's just, insane.
That's the one thing I noticed where there are a lot of people are talking about you can't trust their statements, you can't trust that. I think there's a lot of witnesses' statements, but then what I started to notice was the same thing I noticed when it came to the Zodiac killer, how after a couple of years there were people that were confessing that they were the Zodiac killer, and they would ask them a question like, how would you kill your victims? And the person would be like, I used a hammer. Zodiac killer never used a hammer, but it was someone trying to take the credit for this. It's like why they stopped popularizing names of terrorists in news, because they realized they were giving that terrorist like basically a platform of promotion. Even though they're no longer around to have it, but they were saying their name, and they just stopped saying that, just said terrorism now. It's so you're not popularizing the act and making more people want to do that so they can get their name in a book or something like that. And that's what I started noticing with the Kennedy assassination. I mean, I think it's Helen Markham who said that allegedly the lone nutters say that she saw Oswald get shoot Tippit. Well, she never said who she saw. What she said was it was a short person and a little on the heavy side. But then I pulled up her statement, and I actually posted this on a comment someone left about show me the proof. Her statement was, I saw this man get shot. I went over to him. He had a bullet in his forehead and he was saying something. And right there, I'm like, hang on a fucking second. Did he live after he was shot in the head? Like, that's what happened with Kennedy. Everyone was speculating on the news of what rifle it was, but also they were saying the president's alive. And I'm like, I just watched a Zapruder film. Whether you agree it's altered or not, it's pretty damning. And they just said that the president's still alive. Where I go, was he? I mean, I don't know. Lincoln was shot in the head and he survived, but this looked like it took a giant chunk of his brain out.
Well, you're alive until they pronounce you dead.
That's how it works.
That's how it works. Even though you might be missing half your head. I mean, there's crazy stories, like Phineas Gage, where he was working on the railroad and he went down on a spike, and it came up and went right into his cheek and went right out the top of his head. An iron spike. And this dude like walked 3 miles to the hospital with a hole in his head. And he would start coughing and brain matter would come out. And the whole thing is he miraculously survives, and it goes on to live many, many years. So,
I immediately in my head, I went, cha-ching, he's getting paid by whatever business he's working for.
Well, this was like back in the day. But yeah, I mean, there's crazy. Nothing will surprise me, but I'm sure, like you said, watching the Zapruder film, it's pretty clear that as soon as that headshot hit, he was done, done.
Was there ever any sections of, I guess, the case that you felt like you couldn't agree with? Like, I found it hard for me to agree that the Zapruder film was edited until I realized and started watching it and saw these, what people would call these jumps. Like there's, I think I had Michael Griffith on my show. I'm pretty sure I'm saying his last name right, but he talked about how in the film you see a little boy that's right behind his dad, and then not even in the next frame, like a millisecond, the boy's beside him clapping. There was no walking there, and it was just it's so fast that it's impossible unless the kid can teleport and be in that situation where it looks like, okay, now there's more credit to the fact that the Zapruder film was altered.
Yeah, like I said, I think I've seen some things. Like I've seen a 4K scan of the Zapruder film in a hotel room with Doug Horn and all these other respected researchers, and the details are so intense. And what was then a 4K scan, now we have 8K, 10K. It could be even crazier, but it definitely looks like something was blacked out on the back of Kennedy's head for sure, and that there's something going on with the splatter, of the headshot, the orangeness of it, or it was just really weird looking in crisp detail. But again, without the original copy of the Zapruder film, good luck proving it.
Another thing of why it might be edited is when you saw Jackie Kennedy jump on the back of the car. If you look at the Nix film, she went farther back than I thought, and the Zapruder film never showed that. Like, it seemed like she went all the way, almost like about to jump off the back of the car, like all the way stomach on the back. But this showed like her, like, looks like only her knee went that far, and then she ends up like getting pushed back, or Clint Hill pushes her back in the car, where I'm like, is that a good example to use? Because the Nix film was new to me. I didn't know there was another person that caught another angle of it. That the government knew about that, they would like destroy the shit out of it.
Yeah, well, good luck finding the original Knicks film.
What do you mean original Knicks film?
Yeah, it's gone. It's lost.
Like Harper fragment lost or like document lost?
Well, like the government doesn't know where it is. Lost. There's copies of it out there, but
Okay.
the original Knicks film, Gail Nix Jackson, she's the granddaughter of Orville Nix, and she's a Facebook friend. We've talked to her on the show before, um, and she's been on this crusade for the past decade or so to try to find the original Knicks film, and that's basically all she wants to do, and she hasn't yet. So we'll see.
There's just that, like I said, there's a lot of aspects of this case, but what people would call like what Joe Green would call the strangeness, which is these weird aspects of the case that start popping up. And what I started to notice was my attraction would be Jack Ruby, just because to me he seems like an interesting character. How come there's a Warren Commission statement about the man talking about his heart goes out for Jackie Kennedy? Like, does that mean that Kennedy frequented Jack Ruby's club, or was he doing the same thing General Walker did with his assassination attempt by naming Oswald as the person that tried to assassinate him, just so he could hop on the same coattails of Kennedy's death, basically?
Yes, Jack Ruby's he's a piece of work, buddy.
He's a
and
great
not
guy.
only yeah, not only did he say that, but he was saying other things on film, saying hey, basically get me out of Dallas and I'll tell you anything you want to know. He didn't feel safe in Dallas jail for whatever reason, but they wouldn't take him to Washington and let him tell them what he knew. They gave him a polygraph, which he supposedly passed. But again, he said the whole truth has not come above board, which means that, hey, I'm not telling you everything because I don't want to while I'm still in Dallas for a reason, because he's scared of whatever is going on in Dallas. So it's hard to say.
Did you ever believe any of his statements about them giving him cancer? Because that's where I would say is like the really conspiratorial stuff. But what I found was Walker wrote so Walker, when he was arrested, I don't know how much you know about the Walker incident part, but he made a statement saying that, after Oswald's name was published for being the assassin of Kennedy, he said, that's the guy that tried to kill me. Well, if you look at the statements of the witnesses during the Walker incident, that they saw two people, not one. And the FBI even has documents saying, don't trust a thing he says. He's just making stuff up. He's basically hopping on the coattails of Kennedy's death by saying, if Oswald tried to shoot or shot Kennedy, then tried to shoot me, that means we must be in the same side. So why don't you vote for me? They realized he was using it for political gain. But what was interesting was when he was arrested, he had an envelope that was sent to him, and allegedly he wrote this envelope. But what it said was, please do not give Mr. Walker any psychiatric exams while he is under arrest. No psychiatric evaluations. And there's a thing about Russian, like these experiments with lobotomies. That was the fear. And I go, if you look at that, it was 5 years or 4 years before Jack Ruby allegedly starts going insane after being administered a flu shot, where I start going, Jack Ruby's a good point to talk about MK Ultra, but did it go back even before that? How did Walker know about that? Like, Walker was talking about it way before we even have the documents on Luis Julian West meeting with Jack Ruby.
Yeah. I don't know about the whole cancer thing. I mean, you got to remember the time period we're talking about here, the kind of guy Jack Ruby was. This guy had spent many, many years in smoky clubs, sucking down, secondhand smoke from, for years. The chances of him getting cancer and dying were pretty good. I'm sure his diet wasn't the best. He was popping benzos. He had lifestyle issues.
What do you mean he was popping benzos?
He would pop he ate I think they were called benzos. It was like uppers. He popped upper pills. he had a prescription for these
Well,
pills.
why didn't the Warren Commission talk about this? There's none of that. They said he was a good puppy lover and everybody loved him. That's a
Oh no, no,
lie.
no. Yeah, no. No, I mean, I don't think Jack Ruby really drank a lot, but he used to pop pills, you know, and of course, if he was, like everybody says, bisexual, very promiscuous with his dancers. You know, I think Mark Lane interviewed this guy who said that Jack Ruby would bring his dancers to private parties, for get-togethers, you know, for fees, and that he would sometimes join in and all this other crazy stuff. So, you know, you live a lifestyle like that, chances of you, you know, living past 50, you know, especially if you had a hard life growing up and all that, everything combined into one, it's not out of the realm of possibility that, you know, this guy, given his mental state at the time, deteriorated quickly once he was in prison.
It didn't help they gave him 126 x-rays in a matter of 2 weeks either.
Right.
That's fucking nuts, dude.
Yeah, I don't think anybody injected cancer into him, though. I mean, that's even like by today's standards, is it even possible? I mean, who the hell knows?
Allegedly, from what I heard from Greg Parker, he sent me an article. The CIA was at some type of hospital and it was exposed in the media about injecting cancer cells into people. I don't know if that's just a crazy tabloid journalism type thing, but that's what he used for an example of why Walker said that, or why Jack Ruby said that, was he believed that Jack Ruby was going insane and he saw that article and he thought of that. But then you can't explain his hallucinations of, you know, Jews burning in a street, his brother having no legs, and just really insane stuff. Where I get, if cancer affects your brain, he had it in his lung, he had it basically everywhere. But that was a specific, very, very specific thing that relates to a lot of the stories you hear with MK Ultra.
Oh yeah. I definitely wouldn't put him past him. Like I said, I just did that show not too long ago with, about Jolly West and Jack Ruby and all the other people that Jolly West had treated, if you want to call it that. And of course, there's ties to the MK Ultra program, and you know, it's crazy to think about, but you know, what else? Because by all appearances, you know, everything that we see on Jack Ruby, he wasn't that crazy. You know, I mean, he might have been manic or OCD or ADHD or whatever you want to call him. But as far as openly hallucinating, you know, everything that we see from his trial and the interviews with him, they never get to that point until then. And, you know, was it a ploy just to look batshit crazy so he can get out of jail? Who knows?
I think we kind of skipped over the question a little bit, but when it comes to what you can't agree with, like if you can give me, like, do you have a couple that you can think of that there's things you just won't even entertain? Like, I have stopping points too. Like, I get Prayer Man's controversial. I can see the evidence behind it, but like, there's just a lot of things where it's like the one incidents in the case I could never understand, which is Oswald in this book depository building afterwards, allegedly riding a bus and a taxi. It's information that's not soaking in my head. And one thing that I've had my whole entire life is when it's a story or when it's something that's not necessarily true, it's very hard for me to retain that information. And that's one thing where it's just so sporadic and so all over the place, whether it's a certain amount of events that happened in a short time period, but it just didn't make sense to me. I get he might have a boarding house. I see that there's a person, Lee Oswald or something like that, or whoever that was, or Lee Harvey or whatever, that had a building or had a name there under for a boarding room or whatever, and then someone saying that it looked like Oswald, but I just don't know because I don't know these people. I've never seen them say anything but this specific information, so how can I trust if it's true or not? I mean, what would be their incentive for lying? And then you have like Roger Craig talking about he saw a person up there with glasses and a hat that was up on the building, and then other witnesses saying that they saw a Rambler as well too. So now I have to validate his story.
Yeah, a lot of, like Roger Craig, for example, you know, it was relatively soon after the assassination where, you know, we have Roger Craig on record saying what he said then. Now, Roger Craig in the 70s gets a little crazy, but when you strip away the influence that Mark Lane, and a lot of these other Penn Jones guys, you know, when you have researchers getting onto a witness like that and trying to convince them, oh man, are you sure you didn't see this? You know, you look at this picture here. You remember seeing that, this guy and that guy and this. They can kind of twist and contort a witness's memory to fit their theory of the case. You know, but you know, to get back to your original question about aspects that I just dismiss, or you know, one thing I try not to look on because my brain just starts to melt when I think of it is a lot of the medical evidence, you know, and the assertions of fakery and you know, the double autopsies and a lot of this stuff you're never going to know the true answers to. And that's what I try not to spend a lot of. Yeah, you can prove this guy lied, you can prove this document's fake, or this picture's fake, or it's been faked, or you think it's fake. You know, but the secrecy around everything, especially the medical evidence, I try, you know, I just can't wrap my head around it, you know, or the Zapruder film for that matter. You know, it's, you know, was it faked or was it not? You know, I don't know. You know, could it have been? Sure. Was it? I don't know. You know, we only have so much to go on. You can only prove so much. I like to spend my time looking more through like the earliest witness testimony that we have, which I understand can't be 100% reliable, but when it comes to examining evidence of the case, you want to get the earliest stuff before it becomes contaminated by, you know, either researcher investigations or official investigations.
How much has the researcher investigations actually helped or hurt? I think it helps a lot, but I also see some people that necessarily are just writing something for a book or doing something for a movie or something like that. And it can mess up because especially with like a younger generation, like if you are giving them their first impression into this historical moment, basically, and I mean, if anybody really has seen the Zapruder film, that was my first introduction into Kennedy in junior year of high school. It was a 10-minute little segment on Kennedy, and that was it. They showed the Zapruder film, and that was it. And then I ended up looking more into the case, and I've only been in it 2.5 months now. And I've just started seeing that there's a lot of other deeper, and the medical evidence was the first thing I latched onto. It's interesting. A fake brain. Oh, did they bash his head in? There's things that it's so far into that dark side of the realm where that's not anybody's introduction. That should never be anybody's introduction. This should be something simple. The Zapruder film was fake. How can we prove it? Well, I was skeptical at first. I was kind of like, there's no way they could edit a film back then, really? But then I saw the equipment that they have, and it looks like a fucking meth lab in their basement where they do the photos and stick it up on, like, you know, it's soaking wet. And I go, okay, so it is kind of possible that they could actually just maybe clip out or strip a certain part of the film. But even that's a little bit too over the edge. So let's start with something more simple. Oswald, who was he? And then you start trying to figure that out, and you realize you can't get a good grasp on who this guy is. Is he a nut? Is he a lone nutter? Apparently, people say that he was at a firing range shooting other people's targets, saying, this is what I'm going to do to President Kennedy. Either you're trying to fit in with Dallas because Dallas back then did not like Kennedy, or it's a lie, or someone's using your name. There's 3 different answers there. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah. And most likely, you know, it's to make Oswald's name memorable. You know, like I just recently did an episode about Al Bogart and the downtown Lincoln Mercury dealership and all the crazy shit that was going on in there.
I don't even know about that.
Well, supposedly an Oswald came into the dealership 2 weeks before the assassination and said he was going to come into a bunch of money in a couple of weeks. And he wanted to test drive this Mercury Comet, you know. So they went on a test drive, and he basically took the car on the motorcade route through the city at high rates of speed. Now, supposedly Oswald didn't have a driver's license, couldn't drive. And when they got back, you know, this guy wrote his name down on a piece of paper, Lee Oswald. And, you know, he told a guy there, he said, look, if this guy comes back in to buy this car and I'm not here, take care of him and I'll split the commission with you. And of course, Oswald never came back to buy the car, but somebody dropped a dime on him that was working in the dealership, basically called the FBI and said, hey, these guys, alleged that Lee Oswald came in here. They wrote their name down, his name down. And, even one of the guy's wife said, yeah, he had a piece of paper in his pocket that said Lee Oswald because it was a potential customer. So again, obviously, well, not obviously, it could have been Lee Oswald. He could have known how to drive. Really, how complicated is driving? You're a 24-year-old dude. You might not have a driver's license, but driving a car is not rocket science.
Shit.
You know what I mean?
The way you said that, you said you're a 24-year-old dude and you don't have a driver's license. I'm like, I don't know. I have a driver's license. I thought you're talking to me. I didn't realize you're talking about Oswald.
No. But somebody as old as you, even if you didn't have a driver's license, growing up, you could figure it out. You probably would have been able to drive somebody's car along the way and figure it out. It's not rocket science to drive a car, especially if you've been in the military for 2 or 3 years. It's just, it could have been Oswald being braggadocious, or it could have been somebody making the name Lee Oswald memorable before the assassination, saying that he was going to come into a bunch of money and look, I'll be back and I'm going to buy that car in a couple of weeks because I'm coming into a bunch of money. So
I stick with, like you, for instance, I'm very open to obviously both sides of the art. I've had Dale Myers on here. I enjoyed my conversation with him. I like talking to both sides. People are just people. You might have differences on some things, but everybody can talk. I've spoken with 1,000-something academics before I even got interested into the Kennedy assassination. That's like iron metabolism and all this other crap that's out there scientific wise. This is just a little bit more fun because I get to kind of, talk about the weirdness that's all in all this. But when I talk about the issue of case closed, or it's just one simple thing, it's not, because then you look at examples like there was Gary Hill mentioned to me about, this might be controversial, but Oswald going to a car repair place where Ruth Payne had her vehicle there, and he offered to pay the price for her car being repaired by selling his rifle. Like he was going to trade his rifle for that. Is that true? I don't know. But what I started to notice was Ruth Payne has made public statements that she did not want Oswald staying at her house. She did not like Oswald that much and all this. But then she's so back and forth because then there's letters and there's messages and there's phone calls where Oswald called the house twice and she picked it up both times, even after the assassination. So she's not being truthful. And what I found in my own research was that after Ruth Payne made a statement saying she never spoke with Marina after that assassination. They went their separate ways and that was it. But there's a when the Secret Service was watching Marina, someone made a document saying that they saw Ruth Payne show up to the house with Oswald's mail and asked to speak with Marina, and Marina denied it. So now Ruth Payne is lying. She's not, whether she remembers it or not, she seems like she's on her shit when she starts talking about stuff. But there's things that aren't making sense to her story. And then when I had Tom Graham on here, he mentioned when Ruth Payne drove Marina up to New Orleans, and on the way back, Marina decides to make a mail transfer to not to the New Orleans house, but to Ruth Payne's house, to have all her mail directed to Ruth Payne's house. And what I thought is, I don't know if you've heard the conspiracies that Ruth Payne was like a lesbian or something like that. The way that I handle that is, imagine you just separated with your husband of 17 years or however long, and then what you do is you just got a lady that's now living with you. You develop a close relationship with her kids and all this. Now you're having fun. You don't want it to end. So I bet you when they went up to New Orleans, Marina was having hesitations about moving up to New Orleans, probably because she saw Oswald's home and just didn't feel comfortable. And she was probably convinced by Ruth to stay a little bit longer at her house. I don't think that's a CIA tactic. I don't think that's a love tactic. I think that's just like, you're having fun. You're having a friend at your house, basically, that's staying with you, and you kind of don't want it to end because then you'll be alone in your house. To me, those are all logical things. So when they say case closed, I go, this isn't like conspiracy talk. This is just things you can question, things that are like 2 + 2 is 4. Like, it would make sense. You wouldn't order a rifle under a fake name to a P.O. box under your real name. That doesn't make sense. You wouldn't go around town bragging about killing the president if you were going to kill the president. That's just going to get people to throw you in fucking jail.
Yeah. Like going back to the rifle, it was ordered in the name of Alec Heidel, AJ Heidel, whatever. And if this rifle tied back to this supposed Castro supporter that's in the Fair Play for Cuba committee was found at the scene of the crime, what does that implicate? It implicates a pro-Castro sympathizer taking shots at the president. It doesn't necessarily mean that Lee Oswald was up there shooting that rifle. Maybe Oswald thought that, they would never figure out who really ordered the rifle, despite the fact that the P.O. box was used that could be tied back to him or his mother. And he could have been convinced, somebody could have convinced him, say, look, we're going to have somebody out here. We're going to scare President Kennedy into doing something about Cuba. Here's how we're going to do it. We're going to have somebody taking shots at the dude while he drives through Dealey Plaza. They're going to do a search of the premises. They're going to find this rifle. They're going to tie it back to this fictional AJ Heidel guy, a pro-Castro supporter. And then maybe Kennedy will do something about Cuba. Who knows what the real truth is? But, it's that. I mean, that's just one aspect of how you could say, or how you could come to the fact that maybe Oswald did take this rifle into the depository and planted it, in between all these books.
I can see that. I when I look at the statements of someone saying if I was going to be put in a lineup to be shot at, I would rather have Oswald be the shooter because he was such a bad shot. And then you look at this shot where they recreated it on, I think it's NBC or something like that, where they had the target that was moving 75 yards away and kept on moving away and tried to recreate it. And even some of the best shots said they could make maybe one. I think it was one guy that had the best shot. He was an engineer. He made two of the shots and then one that was a little bit off. And it's just like, it is kind of a difficult shot. And the rifle condition of what they found it in, they talked about that pin, it was very rusty. Like if they were afraid to, mess with it or try and do anything with it because it might break it, then that's tampering evidence. And you just get into this aspect, okay, how easy was it for someone to make that shot? I had a guy who I wouldn't say work with, but he comes to my work. I work at a gym, and he comes in and he saw I was interested in the case. And this is when I noticed it was a controversial thing because you get into it, you start talking about it all the fucking time. It's like you can't shut up about it. So I'm like going around work like, dude, did you know that everyone would just roll their eyes and walk away. And I was like, why is this so like not being talked about? And this guy said back in 1962, 63, he used to stock Pepsis. He worked for a Pepsi company. He used to stock Pepsis and sodas and everything at that place and at other places. He goes, if you just go there and go up to the top, you'll know one man could easily shoot the president. I'm like, but what fucking evidence is that? Like, I don't understand what that is. And then he says Pepsis. I go, I thought it was Cokes that were being stocked at that thing. And he goes, no, I stocked Pepsis there. And I'm like, so did they have a conglomeration or a collaboration of both? And you start realizing that now you're starting to find different holes or small little things. Like I even had a guest that was not on to talk about JFK, but he gave me the weirdest thing that I told Joe Green about Arlen Specter. He was a busboy where Arlen Specter would frequent. And he said when Arlen Specter would come in, what he would want is his usual, which is a martini glass on one tray, walked over to him, placed directly in front of him, not off to the side, directly in front of him, with 3 olives on a toothpick placed exactly on top. That's fucking weird.
Yeah. Dude, this whole case is weird. Like I said at the top of the show, I was going to tell you about Thomas Beckham, right? He's one of, I think, the most fascinating characters in the case. And to my knowledge, still alive today, dude. So he first came to light in the Garrison investigation. When he was trying to build a case against Clay Shaw, somehow this kid at the time, well, not kid, but, early 20s, basically this guy, Thomas Beckham, was a con artist, a country singer, a man of the cloth. He had a bunch of fake degrees and mail order, doctor certificates, things like this. But he was running around New Orleans with Jack Martin, who was famously pistol whipped by Guy Bannister at the beginning of the Oliver Stone movie because he thought that he was digging around in his files. But anyway, this kid Thomas Beckham was hanging around Jack Martin. He knew Guy Bannister. He knew David Ferrie. So if you go back and you look at the grand jury transcripts for the Garrison investigation, they talked to Beckham. I think it's almost 200 pages long, and Beckham doesn't tell him anything. I mean, he just goes off on tangents. He even tells him, "Well, look, I got a document that once everybody sees it, Jim Garrison's done." Right? So they're like freaking out. They're like, "Well, what is this document you have? Where is it? What's it say?" And so he finally says that he got it notarized. Somebody tracked him down in the store and basically told him that they knew for a fact that Jim Garrison was meeting with these seedy homosexuals and having sex with them, and then he even had sex with Clay Shaw and all this stuff. And so they call Thomas Beckham's dad to bring this document down to look at it, and they kind of blow it out of the water. And everything's kind of forgotten, right? Until the HSCA investigation, because they didn't use Thomas Beckham at all. Garrison didn't use him in the trial, probably for good reason. But during the HSCA investigation, LJ Delsa and his partner interviewed Thomas Beckham again in the late 70s. And by then, okay, David Ferrie's dead. Fred Chrisman is dead. Clay Shaw is dead. You know, a lot of these characters are dead and gone. So they offer him immunity for his testimony, and he goes on to tell what he says really happened and what he says is his truth, which entails a fantastic story, basically, of him tied up with all these guys, Bannister, Ferrie, G. Ray Gill, one of Marcello's sons, and they're in G. Ray Gill's office, and he's given an envelope, and they tell him he's got to take it to Dallas. So he flies to Dallas. He meets Lawrence Howard in Dallas a couple weeks before the assassination, hands him this envelope. Howard looks in it, pulls stuff out. He said it was like pictures and diagrams and stuff. And he said that Lawrence Howard looked at him and said, "Is this it?" And Beckham's like, "Yeah, man, this is it. That's what they gave me." He's like, "Are you sure?" And he acted very pissed off and basically told him, tell him, I'm expecting more. So they sent him back, and of course he went back and reported back to him what Lawrence Howard told him, and he was like, what was he missing? And they wouldn't tell him anything. He also stated that he was out front of the Trade Mart in New Orleans when Oswald was handing out leaflets, and that after Oswald was done handing out leaflets, they went down the street and got a Coke, and they were talking, and Oswald basically told him, "Don't worry about it. I'm not worried about it. The chief will protect me." So basically this guy admits knowing Oswald, talking to Oswald, being around Oswald in New Orleans, and even transporting some stuff and implicating other people in the assassination plot. So at the time, they didn't really know what to make of the story, and it was not soon after they interviewed Beckham that they kind of cut off any further investigation. There was some point of the HSCA where they basically ran out of funding at some point, and they pulled the plug on these field interviews. And so they never followed up with Beckham or his allegations. And then this guy, Beckham, writes a book in 2008 called Remnants of Truth. And it's very hard to find. And he basically says the same thing. among other things. But that he was kind of working for the CIA. He was working with Fred Chrisman, who was a CIA agent who was working on Project Looking Glass and all this other crazy stuff. And that they would, they were running money to these Cuban exiles and, doing all this stuff. And basically, people have been following him. He's scared for his life. This is going to be the last thing he says on the entire thing. Was back in 2008. And I've tried to get a hold of him. I've tried to email him. I've tried to call him. I get nowhere. Basically, his son basically said that he's not talking anymore. So it's just another one of those crazy stories, man, that you'd love to find the real answers on, and then, they won't talk anymore.
The amount of times I've heard someone say Oswald was getting a Coke somewhere, I go, this would all be so much easier if we knew if Oswald was diabetic or not. Like, he's not drinking that many Cokes if he's a diabetic. Like, this would all be exposed and wrapped up pretty simple to be like, oh, well, that's obviously fake because he doesn't drink Coke. He's a sugar-free man.
Well, it's a big thing to do, back in New Orleans, they had all these little, like pharmacies, where they would have like the soda lines. And people would actually go have a soda. It was like a big deal. You know what I mean? To go into the corners, like Walgreens or whatever, and sit at the bar and have the girl, pour you a Coke. And
well, look at Vietnam. I always wondered why my grandfather always drank a Coke and he swore religiously by Coke, and he fought in the Vietnam War. And he talked about, because the Coca-Cola sponsored the military, basically, that was a Coke drink. There was no Pepsi involved. It was a Coke family. We're a Coke family. And that was because of what they did for the military during the Vietnam War. And you find out a little bit darker stuff where, like, Coke might actually help create Agent Orange. I had a guest on a long time ago that studied Agent Orange and talked about all these derivative chemicals that they had. There was Agent Orange, Agent Blue, all these different things. And the reason why they called them this was, in the files, Agent Orange's actual real name is like some type of numbered code. And the number code is just one off from the other chemical and the other chemical and the other chemical. So when you're writing something down to try and find these documents, most people think it's going to be under a different categorization, but it's so you get them mixed up. So if you request the Freedom of Information Act and it takes 8 months to go through, you could have requested the wrong number because you were off by one. And it was like, there's really weird tactics in like legal speak, that from looking through documents, but like me saying 1035-960, we know that's the Warren Commission document to the media outlets. We'll look up what I've been saying for the longest time, and I've been mistaken. 1095-360. I've been saying it wrong. I went to go look up what that was, 1095-360, and I'll send it to you. It is a 6-page paper on the human brain, and it's by the CIA. They have a document on this, but what they talk about is ways to manipulate the consciousness. They go into astral projection. They go into remote viewing. They go into all these are all scientifically laid out in descriptions, where I don't know if that's interesting to anybody else out there, but that's interesting to me because it's just two numbers that are switched around and you get a completely different side where the government is. And like, I think you have to like warm people up to the MK Ultra stuff because that was labeled a conspiracy for the longest time. And that's the hardest part about history right now is like, if they destroy a document or what they like, I didn't realize how easy it was until I'm like looking for a file on my computer. I'm like, I must have trashed it. I'm like, it wasn't that simple to trash it, but it's not like impossible to be like, okay, this document either was destroyed because you no longer needed it, or you were told to destroy it, or it just got filed somewhere and nobody knows where that is.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a ton of stuff out there filed in the wrong spots. And, I think, from talking to Bart and Malcolm Blunt, a lot of the stuff that he's found at the archives has just been misfiled. I mean, there's a ton of stuff. And, when you have the human element involved, it's going to happen, whether it was originally done like that, or you have, other workers, at the archives putting something back in the wrong place, or, when they file it, putting the wrong number attached to it. So anything's possible, I mean, the smoking gun document could be sitting in the archives right now in a file labeled, Lord, who knows what. But until we find it, we don't have it.
when it comes to, I guess, who do you think? And it's a dumb question. I hate it when people even ask me about, like, who do you think killed Kennedy? Who do you think would probably be the main person you'd look at? Because I would probably lean more towards Dulles and the CIA, the military industrial complex. But I know people would say Johnson and some people would say the mafia. And I just think I looked at the relationship between the mafia and the military, and it's been going on for a long time. I think maybe that's a possibility, but I think if you look at who overall is pulling the trigger on something like that, the military industrial complex is not going to let the mafia kill Kennedy unless they wanted Kennedy dead.
Yeah, I always thought, and throughout the years, my idea of who was behind this has evolved and changed multiple times. And as you go along your journey, yours will too. Once you find new information out, as long as you're open minded, you'll be like, okay, all right, now we have to account for this. Now we have to account for that. So this, what I thought before, doesn't make sense anymore. My answer to that question, and I always thought, okay, if I'm in Dealey Plaza, I got the rifle, I'm behind the grassy knoll, and I'm pulling the trigger, and I'm taking this guy out. It's either has to be because I'm getting paid an exorbitant amount of money to do this, or ideologically, I'm so opposed to this guy that I don't care if I'm getting paid or not. I'm taking this motherfucker out. You know what I mean? So for me, it's one of two possibilities. Either it's a paid assassin or it's an ideological assassin. And if we're in the realm of ideological assassins, then we're into they're against Kennedy's personally for his policies or what he's done. And the only thing that he really did that would have pissed a lot of people off is the Bay of Pigs. He was viewed as being soft on communism, and a lot of people who were anti-Castro fighters and Castro and Cubans, lost their lives. A lot of people lost their buddies, their friends, and a lot of these guys just happened to be mercenaries, CIA guys. So in the mindset of a lot of these people, like including like General Walker and a lot of these far extreme right wingers back in the day who were going around giving these speeches about Castro and Cuba, Reverend Billy Hargis, General Walker, Lauren Hall, the John Birch Society. You go back and you look at these people who was blatantly speaking out against Kennedy and his policies and Cuba, who were ideologically screwed up enough to get behind a plot to take Kennedy out, or even still be that guy who would pull that trigger regardless of the consequences. And to me, I can see it more as that kind of a plot rather than, okay, it's a CIA plot with E. Howard Hunt and Frank Sturgis on the grassy knoll and all this kind of stuff. I'm leaning more toward rogue elements of the CIA, and also anti-Castro mercenaries or Cubans. Because if you go back and you look and you see, and like you talked to Larry Hancock a couple of times, he had a great book, Someone Would Have Talked, where you get into the stories of these guys, Roy Hargraves in particular. He was running with Interpen, guys like Jerry Patrick Hemming, Lauren Hall, Lawrence Howard. And then you hear, okay, Thomas Beckham says he took something to Lawrence Howard in Dallas 2 weeks before the assassination, where Howard was running around with Hall, who was arrested with Howard in Dallas a month before the assassination. And then you start putting all this stuff together where Hemming is saying, okay, well, my buddy Felipe Vidal Santiago was in Dallas the week of the assassination. I couldn't get a hold of him. He was supposed to go there and be meeting with General Walker. I was trying to warn him not to go to Dallas. And then you have an interview with Noah Twyman that he did with Roy Hargraves that Larry Hancock published, where he basically admitted that him and Vidal Santiago were in Dallas, and he didn't come out and say it, but he pretty much insinuated that they were involved in the assassination in some form or fashion. So it's these very seedy, unknown elements that you have to be able to put all these pieces of the puzzle together to kind of put a mental picture together and grasp the concept of how this actually came together and was executed. And it's so far under the radar. It's easy to say, oh, CIA was behind it. Alan Dulles ordered it. It's easy to do. It's easy to say that, but it's not so easy to prove,
I want to toss a couple fringe things at you, just from my own perspective and my own understanding. And I didn't necessarily believe it at first either. And you could tell me if this kind of might resonate or might not. My show is conversation. It's not interviews. I just talk to people, and necessarily you end up revealing something you necessarily probably weren't even going to end up talking about. But I had Peter Kuznick on my show, who wrote Untold History of the United States with Oliver Stone. He had a different take about Kennedy than probably what most of the Kennedy, because the issue when you start going into the Kennedy assassination, where I started noticing all these experts that study it, they're fanboys of Kennedy. I don't mind Kennedy at all. I just don't have a relationship with who he was as a president. I don't know anything about him because I'm from a younger generation. So I'm coming in with a perspective that has no biases in any direction. If it's not a conspiracy and it's all this, then I'm not losing any sleep over it. But I just started noticing things that are things you can question. So I tried to think, how big of an issue was communism? How big of an issue was it at this time? So I talked to a buddy of mine who works at the United Nations, Miles Pomper, who works as it's nuclear threat disarmament. And he was talking about, well, communism was this thing like where they had jets that would fly basically at the borderline between America and Russia, or not America and Russia, between there's points where Americans were stationed and then where Russia was, and they would just fly and basically just in a line, like kind of following each other, one on one side, one on the other side, just waiting for an excuse to attack the other one if they stepped over the boundary. That's how tensions were so high up back then. So now I'm starting to understand communism more, but let's take it from a more common example that everyone can remember because it just happened recently, COVID. At the beginning of COVID, everyone thought that your loved one was going to die. Like everyone thought we were going to lose half the population of Earth, like it was going to be a Thanos snap. So that's probably what communism was, a fear back then. You thought that any moment you could go to a nuclear war and the world was about to change. So now I can understand it a little bit more. But what Peter Kuznick said was that Kennedy started off on a platform, and this is where Oliver Stone kind of takes it, like he saw the horrors that happened and he switched his thing for an idea of peace. That is true. But also he switched when he was like, he thought he ran on a platform because he knew that was a way to get elected. Kennedy changed somewhere in his office. He changed in that time period and completely went the opposite of what he was initially elected for. And Peter Kuznick said that his whole family had these conservative roots and backgrounds. This Kennedy was just ended up changing into something that he initially never even started in. It wasn't an idea of just to get elected. It was he experienced real change. He experienced something completely different by going over to these countries and talking to them and getting to know these people, creating backdoors between Castro, creating backdoors between Khrushchev. And if you look at Eisenhower, who was just this person that, I mean, Bay of Pigs was an inherited problem of Kennedy. What makes me like Kennedy is the fact that he goes, I am the leader. I am the person who will take the blame. Even though it wasn't his problem, it wasn't his fault. To me, that's a sign of someone with integrity. So you get to this point where you have all these inherited problems that Kennedy ends up taking the blame for. But notice how the CIA was so involved in Cuba long before Kennedy even came around. Now you start realizing that the CIA had this idea of plausible deniability. Don't let the president doesn't need to know about that. Only if it's an emergency. You don't need to even ask them because they're so used to getting the word yes all the time. Now you look at, let's take it from a business aspect. All the profits they were getting out of Cuba, all the profits they were getting out of, just the connections that they were making from casinos, mafia, whatever you want to say. The mafia had connections. They didn't want to lose Cuba either. They had ties over there as well too. Then here's the fringe part. the reason why we were in Vietnam. Now, there's many speculations on to reasons why you went to war, but John Potash, when I had him on my show, I asked him, why do you think we're in Vietnam? He goes, it's not a coincidence that the two longest wars America has ever been in have been Vietnam and Afghanistan. And what's one common similarity with Vietnam and Afghanistan? It's one of the giant trades of heroin. And that's where I say it's fringe, because people will roll their eyes on there. So I go, I mean, that's I get it. It's drugs, it's profit maybe, but he explained it in a way where if you look at the poison or the killing attempts on Castro, one of the things was poison cigars. The chemical that's in poison cigars and that is a thing called botulium, or it's botulium or something like that. Botulium. And it's something else after it, but it's like black tar. And what that's commonly found in is heroin. So, I mean, if you find a chemical, whether you want to use it as a drug, as heroin or not, and I've heard stories of soldiers on my show that have explained guarding poppy fields with no explanation of why they were guarding poppy fields over there. So you get into like to this controversial area, but you start looking at it with, even if that's fringe and even if all the other stuff's fringe, but the connections in mafia, the connections with gun running in Cuba, all these types of things, you start realizing this isn't just a person that they hated. You got to look at this as an aspect of, this is a person that's going to fuck with their money. And that's how you look at it. And that's how you can understand why all this stuff sounds insane. It sounds crazy, because you examine it from a perspective of, why would they just kill a person they disagree with? It wasn't just that. Imagine you find a way to make Google lose $1 billion. You're telling me a black van's not going to pull up to your house and throw you in it? Like, that's the thing. It's a profit incentive. At this point, they've been so far in the game that they're trying to keep their money. Their lifestyles have probably adjusted. I was used to spending $5 a day. And then I started working 2 jobs. And now my increase of how much I spend a day is way more than $5. So you start realizing you adjust your income. Bill Gates didn't start spending $1 million on a yacht or anything like that. No, actually, he rents out his yacht for $600 million a week. That's fucking nuts. That's just bad money spending. But if you got money, you can do that. And you make unreasonable choices with that money. So now you look at it from that, the business aspect, when it comes to heroin, when it comes to all these things, and why Kennedy pissed people off. It was because you're not just messing with, it's not that we don't like you because you're a liberal. It's because we don't like you because now you're messing with my money.
Yeah. Well, back then in the 50s, 60s, 70s, the CIA and the military, were both held under strict budgets, and they were watched over. So to do anything extraneous, you need a black budget. Where does that money come from? It comes from drugs. At least that's what I think. You hear these stories about, drugs coming back stuffed in the bodies of dead soldiers from Vietnam, things like that. And, it's totally believable, or just throwing it all on a big C-130 and bringing it back. And there's allegations that the CIA, like with Gary Webb, they started the whole crack thing. And, stuff like Mena, Arkansas, and Bill Clinton, and all this stuff ties back to the CIA, Barry Seal. It's not a big secret that if they want to maintain autonomy and do what they want to do, that they're going to need a black budget to do it. And that funding, that money has to come from somewhere. And if it's not allocated by our government, and, of course, when you're giving money to an organization, you have to basically account for where your money is spent. You can be audited. And to do things that are, a little not above board per se, you need the funding to do that. And I think all of that stems from money brought in from the drug trade, illegal arms trade, drug trades, things like that. So yeah, it's not surprising.
I know saying that's probably going to get some people like, oh, and they're going to roll their eyes at it. But I just look at it from this aspect of, if you can understand how many people wanted Castro dead, and we're okay with we accept the fact that, like, if you find out they had assassination attempts on Castro, you go, yeah, I heard that guy was a horrible dude. because that's what you were told. And it's okay because it's not in your country. The example I would always use would be when I talk to someone about renewable energies. And we mentioned, I mentioned an example in my town, which is about building solar, or not solar panels, wind turbines. Our town wanted wind energy, but what happened was they go, okay, we're going to build it 3 miles off our coast. And I live in Ocean City, so that would obstruct people's view. And they go, oh, I don't want it anymore. So you don't want the clean energy, but you all because it's going to obstruct your view. And you start realizing the reason why we mine resources out of another country is so we don't have to see it. And now you get into this aspect. Does that make it okay? No, but people who are hypocrites will say it's okay because I don't, it's not happening here. But does that mean the only problem you care about are things that you can see? What about the things that you can't see? And now you've opened up the door to the conspiracy side of things where the things you can't see are scary and dark. The way that I stand with everything that I talk about, I love the government messing around. I love that type of shit. I'm not an anarchist. I don't want to burn it down. I think you have to notice evil and correct it, but I don't like being told a fairy tale. We've spent way too long in this country understanding that it's all Superman and all this. Well, Superman smokes cigarettes, and you got to accept that. And you can't be mad when you find out the truth. There are hard things I believe the government has to do for protection, but I also look at it's not just our government, it's every government. There's dark history about it. And I think as a human person, you should understand it. And I get it if people don't want to live in that reality. But to me, it's just like, I like knowing about it. There's nothing I can do about it. I mean, shit, I'll smoke a cigarette. It's just like after sex, you smoke a cigarette. I'm outside freaking stroking my hair like Kramer because I'm losing my mind that, Kennedy was killed in some aspect. But I just go, you can let it freak you out. You can let it ruin your life. Or you could just look at it like now you're more knowledgeable about how the world works. And you start realizing the evils of things and you start noticing of things you can start to question more.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect analogy. And, you first want to get in this case and you think you want to learn all you can learn about the assassination. You want to try to be the guy who figures it out, who comes up with the answer, who solves the case, this, that, and the other. But the more important aspect, at least to me, is the investigation. I love I love a good mystery. And I was raised on Hardy Boys books and Scooby-Doo and shit like that, back in the day. That's just how I grew up. I grew up reading a lot. And, once you dive into this subject, it's like a gateway drug to other things because you see it's a window into the world of how things work, and not just one thing, but you see how the FBI works. You see how the CIA works. You see how cover-ups work. You see how setups or patsies are involved in things. You see how assassinations are pulled off in other countries and these coups and overthrows and why it's done. And is it out of the realm of possibility that it was done here? No, it's not out of the realm of possibility. It could very well have turned around. And then you look around and you think to yourself, okay, well, they tried to kill this Castro guy who's literally 60 miles off our shore for 60 years and they couldn't do it? So how good is the CIA at assassinations? You know what I mean? Like, you couldn't kill this guy. He's basically 90 or 60 miles away, 90 miles away saying, fuck you. I'm still here. I'm 95 years old. I lived through it all. You tried to kill me 100 times and I'm still here, and that it makes you think like, okay, well, how good is this, assassination squad of the CIA? Where was QJ Win, with his rifle? I mean, couldn't they get this guy? Couldn't they get him? You have all these anti-Castro Cubans and anti-Castro Americans, running independent raids into Cuba to try to get this guy. They couldn't sneak one guy through there, one Rambo type dude to take this guy out. Or they tried to poison him with chicks and pills, and you couldn't get the job done. So how good is this CIA assassination squad?
They try to get them through all the major gateways. They try to get them through women. They try to get them through drugs. They try to get them through like cigars. They try to get them through whiskey. They try to get them through a bunch of stuff. I'm like,
yeah, through food. Like
I wouldn't have made
poison his food, and he'd be like, I'm not eating it. Or he'd have a guy, all right, dude, you take a bite, and if you're okay, then we're good. He's like almost like Dr. Evil, Mike Myers, of Cuba back then. But how good was the CIA assassination squad?
I think it's a strategy. I think it was much more probably better for them to think that Castro would be living in fear, be paranoid as hell, and start questioning more about his own army, causing a stir up between. And that's what I started noticing about the Bad Pigs was a lot of the individual actors that were over there. It was about divisivizing the population and causing them to stir up against Castro to hopefully spark up an army against his own people, basically. And I think that's a smart strategy. But did you I talked to someone about the media influence, the military influence in media, and it's really, really dark. Like J. Edgar Hoover had a whole policy about invading Hollywood looking for informants, and actually was on the FBI website, saw a Disney file. Dude, this is how crazy it is. The first page on Walt is 700 pages. I read all 700 because it was so damn fascinating to me. The first page was, we're going to incorporate FBI agents into cartoons with Mickey Mouse so the kids can look at the FBI and hopefully want to be one when they get older. That's fine to me. I'm okay with that. But then 600 pages in, you find out that he's ratting out his employees, calling them communists, having them deported and interrogated by the FBI, all because they wanted to strike up labor unions. Or I'm like, you fucking asshole. And then like there's, him pointing, they photoshopped a cigarette out of his freaking fingers. So there's a lie again. But so the whole point of that is, when I mentioned the Hollywood influence or military influence on Hollywood, I had Matthew Alford on here, who made a documentary called Theaters of War. And he mentioned about the interview, because I mentioned to that must have been a problem for the military. I would assume you're making a movie about assassinating Kim Jong-un. Like, are you kidding me? Like, even James Franco and all that hate us because they ain't us. And he goes, did you know the CIA funded that movie? And I go, what? And he goes, if you look afterwards, after that movie came out, what they did was they took it, put it on a thumb drive, put it to helium balloons, and they tried to launch it over the border so the people of the population over there would take it, stick it into their computer, and then, they would see the real exposing of how bad their dictator is. There's an article about people that were being killed because they were sticking this hard drive into their computer, and it had that movie on it. So that's an unintended consequence that the CIA didn't think through, of them being killed. But you just realize, like, holy shit, there's like strategies all over the board that have either really bad consequences or, they're good, weird ass moves that they do.
Yeah. I think that's one thing the CIA does well is propaganda, and not really assassinations. Because if you go back and you look, you think the Hollywood aspect of it, glorifies the CIA. When you watch something like Mission Impossible, or you see these spy movies, that make it look really cool to be a spy. Like there's, Jason Statham's, diving off the building. And, I just watched The Gray Man the other day. You see these badass assassins, the CIA. And that's what you want to, that's the romantic version that Hollywood wants you to think about. This is a CIA agent. When in reality, you have somebody at the CIA making a decision. Okay, we're going to call up this guy, Robert Mayhew, who was a former FBI agent, detective. Now he has his own detective agency, but he's tight with the Italians. He's tight with the mafia. We're going to get with him to be our intermediary guy, and we're going to offer. We want the mafia to take care of Castro. We don't want to be associated with it. It's our idea, but we're going to use them. We're going to pay them to do our dirty work for us. And I think that's the reality of the situation when you look at CIA plots. You don't have these super awesome, CIA agents running around the world doing all these clandestine, killings and all this stuff. But rather, you see the ineptitude when it comes to taking out Castro, and where they're good at propaganda. They're good at trying to sway the minds of the people, to do their dirty work for them, like in the Guatemalan coup. So I think that's where they excel doing their thing. But as far, and then you kind of look at a plot like killing Kennedy. Was it the brightest idea? Whoever thought of this, if it wasn't Oswald, to do this in broad daylight in front of hundreds of people in a static location at high noon while the president's driving down the street in a car. Whose plot is this? You know what I mean? Like that, this is your best idea. Like you couldn't have somebody just come up and jab him in the ass with a heart attack, syringe while he's at Love Field, shaking everybody's hand. I mean, that's some CIA shit, not what happened in Dealey Plaza. You know what I'm saying?
If anything, they would have just had the Secret Service guy be like, hey, can you do me a favor? Fake a heart attack and just drive into a tree.
Right.
They didn't have seatbelts. Kennedy was not wearing a seatbelt when that happened.
I'm sure it wouldn't have taken much to co-opt one of his Secret Service agents to slip something in his drink or, some top secret CIA shit, But this is what happened. Dealey Plaza happened. It didn't happen a different way where you eliminate the problem and there was maybe a lot of questions that need answered, but it could have looked natural or more natural than what it was. It didn't have to be a blow your head off murder in broad daylight at high noon in Dallas, Texas.
It's just
in front of hundreds of people.
It's so aggressive.
Yeah, it's like the ultimate fuck you, And for whoever was on that grassy knoll, because I believe somebody was up there.
It's Woody Harrelson's father.
No.
I don't know where that conspiracy got in, but it's interesting.
Well, that comes from Charles Harrelson's own mouth. But I don't think he was up there. I think he was trying to get out of a long jail sentence. But I think somebody was on the grassy knoll. I think the headshot came from the front left or front right. And I think somebody was on the grassy knoll, and whoever it was got away with it. They got away. Yeah. Now, whether or not they had help, along the way, or if somebody stationed here turning people away, saying they were a Secret Service agent or a police officer or something. Hey, don't come back here any further. It's just crazy that somebody got away with it. If it wasn't Oswald, they got away with it.
Yeah. They had a chance to find who it was, but instead they rather pin the blame on someone. So, I mean, even if it is Oswald, if it's not Oswald, I think you just got to look at the things you can question and be able to. That's my whole thing, is just don't lose the question aspect of things. I think what you do with your show, I got to get Doug on here at some point to talk about his as well, too. And that'd be cool to have you both on. Have the both quick hits. Is it both of you guys quick hits, and then you guys have your separates, right?
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Well, where can people find your podcast, find quick hits, and find anything else you want to promote?
They can find them anywhere good podcasts are listened to. They're pretty much on every platform out there. If you don't have a podcatcher or something to listen to podcasts on, just Google it. It's on iTunes or whatever iPodcast it is now. I don't know. I'm an Android guy. So, but yeah, anywhere that they can follow along on Twitter at the Lone Gunman 7, on Facebook, the Lone Gunman Facebook page. I used to interact a lot more than I do now. My level for dumb shit, or my tolerance for dumb shit, has greatly lessened over the years. I used to go on, Facebook groups and forums and argue with people, and I finally realized, that's a gigantic waste of time, because you're never going to change anybody's mind on this. They have to come to their own realizations about the case. If somebody believes that Mac Wallace and Loy Factor were up on the 6th floor, and while James Files is on the grassy knoll and Judy Baker's banging Lee Oswald on the 1st floor bathroom at the time of the assassination, then that's what they're going to believe. And you can't change their mind. It is what it is. So as my years have gone by, I kind of try to stay under the radar, do my own thing, and just let all the other stuff go, because it can be very muddy waters out there. I tried for a long time to try to clean up some of the muddy waters, and it's just not worth the effort anymore. So it's just, now I got the blinders on, I'm doing my thing. You want to listen, great. If you don't, that's fine too. But yeah, I've been blessed to be doing this for 8 years. And dude, when I saw how many episodes you had, I was like, he had to start at like episode 1,000, right? I mean, this is bullshit. But so I looked on the podcast feed, and I'm going back. I'm like, no, this dude really has like 1,300 episodes.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is insane. It's like one a day, like for the past 4 years. It's like, holy crap. So my hat's off to you, dude. That's insane what you do. As prolific as you've been doing it. Wow.
Insomnia helps. But yeah, I just started taking weekends off, and I'm getting a little bit of crap for it, but that's okay. I don't really use my social either. I post once a day and that's it. I'll answer a message or something, but you got to limit and make sure you don't spread yourself too thin. And especially, once you enter like the JFK community, it's just any tips for any new people. I advise people to get interested in it. I've gotten more of a historical perspective or just understanding and more fascination with it. And I think every researcher that I've talked to, every researcher like yourself and people who've talked to other researchers as well too, I value your guys' time, and there's always some of the best conversations because we can just talk and learn from each other of it. But Rob, I'm going to link your links in the description, get you to your show recording and everything. But seriously, man, it's been a pleasure. You're welcome back anytime. Thanks for listening to this episode of Out of the Blind.